It's Black History Month, and we're very honored and lucky to have a colleague, a former student of mine, a friend, and a comrade in justice with us this evening. Um, this is our guest, Takura Nyamfukudza, and that's the toughest part of my job, saying his last name this evening. So I'm now exhaling and going to enjoy the rest of the evening. But most of you who know Takura know him as T. That's what we call him. It makes all of our lives easier. But Takura is an accomplished defense attorney, very much in his own right. He's a partner with CNN Defenders here in Lansing, Michigan. And he's won numerous awards, not the least of which was the top 5 under 35 from the Ingham County Bar Association. And he was also recognized by the state bar as one of the best top young lawyers. So he's still young. I like how you win all those young categories. And he also was recognized as the rising star lawyer by the Davis-Dunning Bar Association. And before I turn it over to Takura, I just want to share some really great news with everybody that I hope will lead off our discussion. The Cooley Innocence Project achieved an exoneration today. And we released our client, Mr. Kenneth Nixon, who spent over 15 years in prison for a crime he did not commit. And everyone is still celebrating, I hope. And I hope that Mr. Nixon is, now, I know he is in the arms of his family, and, his life is forever changed and turning a corner. But it's not a coincidence that our office in the last handful of months also worked with Takura and his firm, and they achieved an exoneration for Mr. Lucino Hamilton. And we provided DNA expertise and support in that case. So I thought it might be a really great way to start the conversation tonight, right, Takura? And we're gonna talk about how race impacts the criminal justice system. But I think, these two men's stories highlight that, obviously everything in the criminal justice system affects each and every one of us very personally. So with that, maybe you could share a little bit of your experience about working on Lucino Hamilton's case, and that I think will lead us into some of the broader issues that people of color face in this criminal justice system today.
Thank you for that very kind introduction. And I'll begin by saying there are each of these topics that we will discuss by themselves, we could focus on for several hours. So I will resist the urge to go too far down any rabbit holes. And while I see colleagues and other folks who I know are attorneys, I won't assume that anybody, or rather that everybody on here knows about, I'm going to talk very briefly about Dred Scott versus Sanford, which is something that anyone who has ever sat in constitutional law knows about. But again, I won't make any assumptions, but I will not belabor any points. But yes, Lucino Hamilton, we worked on his case for 6 years, and I am thrilled to finally be speaking with Lucino and not being limited, right? And hearing a recording, this call will end in however many minutes, and being mindful of what we have what we're typing in JPay. It's wonderful now. The first time sitting in his apartment, he has a driver's license now. He's doing so many things now that many of us on this call take for granted, don't think about for 1 second. I remember when we left the prison and we went to Capital Prime. Many of you, if you haven't eaten there, know where it is. I got Lucino a steak that was as big as his arm. And when it came time to choose what sides and what drinks to get, he said, you know what, can you help me with this? And because so many decisions for so long, 26 years, for 26 years, this man could not decide what he would eat, when, and so on. And when it was time for him to finally make decisions, you know, it was a little bit challenging. But now I think he is getting better at it. But of course, it hasn't been very long since he was released. And it's sad to say, there are many Latino Hamiltons who are still serving time and may not see the light of day, who will draw their last breath behind bars. And, you know, thank goodness for the work of Professor Sisson and Lori Montgomery and other folks. It was a team effort. But I remember writing snail mail letters, right? Putting letters in envelopes, stamps, sending them off to Latino, and he showed me that he kept all of them. And he let me know that each of these letters let him know that somebody took time and let him know that he mattered. And, you know, again, we had a podcast where we spoke with Latino, and I could talk about this case for a long time, because for 6 years we worked with and for Latino, and I'm just happy that he's out and that someone else is out of prison now and gets to join his family, because I know that every single person we represent, while their name may be the only one in the caption, you know, whether it's people of the state of Michigan or even this Meridian Township versus whoever it is, the work that we do impacts that person, their loved ones, their friends, neighbors, co-workers, and so on. So I know that we do work on more than just the behalf of the people who we represent directly. Because this is Black History Month, perhaps this is news to some, maybe not to others, but I wonder if the name Carter G. Woodson means anything to anyone. Anyone? Carter G. Woodson. Okay, I see some heads shaking left and right. Okay, I see one thumbs up, but I've heard many people ask why February is the month in which we celebrate Black History Month. Some people have said, because it's the shortest one. No, that's not the reason. Actually, Carter G. Woodson, who was a Harvard-educated historian, attended the 50th anniversary of the Emancipation Proclamation in Illinois, and these celebrations lasted 3 weeks. And he thought, my goodness, so this is fantastic. So because Abraham Lincoln, Honest Abe, you know, his birthday was on the 12th of February in 1809, Frederick Douglass, who I hope and I believe many of you also know, also celebrated his birthday in February. His was on the 20th of February, 1895. So because of what these two men, Abraham Lincoln and Frederick Douglass, meant, and as a result of all their efforts for the, you know, Blacks and African American community at large, Carter G. Woodson thought, you know what, this would be a fantastic month because these two men were born in this month, and it only makes sense. So Emancipation Proclamation, I hope I don't have to go very deeply into that, but I think that at least rings a bell for most of you. But that is why February is Black History Month. I spoke about Dred Scott. Oh, okay, there's a comment there about a museum in Florida. Thank you for that. Thank you for that. Now, Dred Scott versus Sanford, 1857 decision, where our United States Supreme Court said, you know what? All this stuff we talk about in the Bill of Rights, whether you're free as a Black man or you're a slave, none of this is meant for you folks. Now, of course, that was quite some time ago, and we've moved beyond that. But as we think about the history of policing, when we hear the phrase law and order, what many folks don't realize, every time I go to Grand Rapids and I go to the 5th floor, which is where the United States Marshal Service and those special agents, that's where they work out of, the 5th floor. If you do a little bit of research, you'll find that law and order actually and the origins of policing in America were that These were the folks who, when slaves ran away, those were the ones who brought them back. So I think it's not surprising that policing has impacted Black and brown people, that continues to impact Black and brown people the way it does today. Now, fortunately, you know, Latino and other folks have had the benefit of, you know, the efforts of the Innocence Project. But when we think about George Floyd, that is a name which, for unfortunate reasons, I think rings bells. But let's remember that there are too many names. There are too many names. We can't get through everybody. But that was actually, if we think about Eric Garner, he was choked out also, drew his last breath. His life was snuffed out by people who were supposed to serve and protect. But let's think about the origins of police in America and what that meant back in the day. A study was done, actually was released on the 27th of August last year in Washtenaw County, Ann Arbor, right? I think everyone on this call is probably familiar with that. And that study looked at, I think, about 1,000 criminal cases spanning 7 years. They looked at everything from driving on a suspended license up to homicide, and they examined as it relates to charges, right? If were Black people as likely or more likely to get charged with certain offenses than Caucasians were? And it turned out that as it relates to homicide, with almost identical facts, Black people were 7.5 times more likely to be charged with homicide. And as it relates to felony firearm, resisting and obstructing, 29 times and 7 times more likely. So the numbers are there. The numbers are there. And I practice in state courts as well as federal courts. Here in Michigan, we have the Eastern and Western District. One example, which I think, there's a special on Netflix. It's called Crack. I watched this documentary and it was fantastic because you heard directly from people, former addicts, some of them may be still current, but people who sold drugs, police officers, and these people explained the experiences as it related to crack cocaine. Now, many people have heard, oh boy, there once was a time when powder cocaine versus crack cocaine, there was a disparity of 1 to 100. It went down eventually to 1 to 10. And as a result of the Fairness in Sentencing Act, thanks to President Obama, right, we closed that gap. But still, there are ones that exist. And if we look at how the numbers, as this Washtenaw County study shows, Black people are arrested, prosecuted, and convicted for, the numbers speak for themselves. I don't, there may be some police officers who only see a person's skin and for that reason probably target them. And a lot of it may have to do with the zip code, and some will argue that is class. But again, I think when we look at America's history, we have come very far, but there's still a lot of work to do. And I think the numbers speak for themselves. Now, Eli Savitt, who is Washtenaw County's new prosecutor, he, I think, is doing some fantastic things. For example, he gave his assistant prosecuting attorneys, he said, look, no more cash bonds, because I was a member of the Michigan Joint Task Force on Jail and Pretrial Incarcerations. Wow, mouthful. And we looked at why it is that people are spending time in jail. And driving on a suspended license turned out to be one of the top 10 reasons that people are spending time. And unfortunately, there were people who were spending time in jail, not because they're really dangerous or because we're scared of them, but for no reason other than them not being able to post the bond. So as a result of the work of that joint task force, many offenses have now been reduced or are in the works. If it hasn't happened yet, it's in the works. They've been reduced from felonies to misdemeanors, misdemeanors to civil infractions, and some things that once were civil infractions have been decriminalized. Now, I shouldn't assume. Like I said, I wouldn't assume that everybody knows what, certain terms of art are. So I hear on the news all the time, oh, this person was sent to jail for 15 years. No. If you're in custody for more than a year, then that's prison. And if it's less than that, is jail. But the civil infraction is where essentially you just pay a fine. So, I mean, there are changes in the works. At the federal level, I talked about the Fairness in Sentencing Act. Fairness in Sentencing Act, pardon me. And the Fair Sentencing Act also is some legislation that came out recently. And essentially it says, look, let's look at these. And when I say football numbers, I mean that literally. In the federal system, if you sell more than 50 grams of methamphetamines to somebody, mandatory minimum 10 years. So, the United States Sentencing Guideline Commission looked at all these offenses that people were serving time for, mandatory minimums, and they said, let's look today if you would still get the same sentence. And if not, then you can, thank goodness, it's retroactive now. So they said, if at the time you were sentenced, you received, however many months, mandatory minimum or otherwise, if you would have received less time today based on the amount of weight that, you were caught with or accused of having had, because sometimes all it takes is somebody pointing the finger and saying this, that, and the third thing. And in the federal system, it's not unusual for people to hop onto somebody's case and say, hey, I heard Larry Lawless did this. And, a lot of times that can get people time off their sentences. But so there are a lot of people who are now going home, thankfully, because the Fair Sentencing Act made the Fairness in Sentencing Act retroactive. I did a special along with my business partner, Mary Chartier, 3 episodes called Race in America. And again, we had State Representative Sarah Anthony, a number of members from our community, Wayne Lind, Robert Easterly, a lot of people, 3 episodes. And that is available on our website. Each of them is probably about 28 minutes because, they have to fit advertising time in there and whatnot. But there's a lot to learn in those. I've been talking. Does anyone have any questions yet? I've just been.
Well, I wondered, Takura, if you could talk a little bit about, in a little more depth about, sort of this prison to pipeline thing where African Americans are stopped more often, they're searched more often, they're prosecuted more often, and they not only do they go to prison, but they go to prison for much longer terms. And some of your ideas for tackling those problems. I mean, you mentioned the bail, issue, but I'd be interested in some of your thoughts on those issues.
Right. So, boy,
and you have 1 minute, counsel, 1 minute.
Right. So once somebody is in the system, it is very, very difficult to get out. And I don't know if I mentioned it earlier, but for example, if somebody falls behind on their child support, there once was a time in Michigan where for not paying child support, you could have your license suspended. Now, unlike New York City, where you can get from one borough to another at any hour of day, right? Either on a train or on the bus. That's not so. If you live on the south side of Lansing and you work in Okemos, you start work at 6 o'clock in the morning. Boy, you don't have very many options. So I'm trying to get to work so I can keep a roof over my head and food in my stomach. And then I get stopped and my license gets suspended. So now I can't get to work. And if I'm the sole breadwinner, now my kids If somebody learns that I'm not at home, all it takes is one day. If you're an hourly wage earner, all it takes is one day for you not to show up, then you're out of luck. Now you can't post bond. And by the way, once you're in custody, if any of you have ever heard of Securus, that is the phone system that people in certainly in MDOC, the Michigan Department of Corrections, that's what they use to call home. And it is very, very, very expensive. Now, I'm a member of the criminal law section. We have prosecutors and defense attorneys on there. We met on Tuesday and we came up with a resolution that said, listen, the Michigan Department of Corrections should stop profiting to the tune of $11 million a year. And phone calls, which for most of us, if you have an unlimited plan, you don't have to pay any extra, but sometimes it costs up to 10 times more for people in prison to call home. And there have been studies that have been done that show, look, if you maintain contact with your loved ones, that keeps the wind in your sails and you're less likely to recidivate. And also, there have been other studies which show that after 3 years, now, there are exceptions to this. There are folks who, have done some awful things, and doubtless, people will always look and say, oh my goodness, how about that one person who was let out on bond and then they climbed through 15 people's windows and they did all sorts of terrible things. They will always look to the most extreme cases to try to justify bad policy. But once you're in the system, it's very difficult to get out. And it starts at a very young age. Adultification, unfortunately, and this is especially true for Black girls, where they are seen as being more mature, less innocent, and requiring less guidance. So it results in tougher sanctions for things that they do at school. And once you receive that label of she's naughty or whatever it is, then it follows on from school into being introduced into juvenile justice system, and it just goes on from there. And when it comes to, we're helping a young man right now. I just submitted a request for deviation, which is, listen, we understand what it is that this young man is accused of having done, of what he's accused of doing. But there's a lot more to him than what is in the four corners of this petition. Now, we've got a few weeks until the next pretrial, and hopefully, they look at all the community service that he's done at his very young age, and the support that he has from his family. And these are all things which point to him being successful. And while he's internally motivated, the court certainly has options, and discretion from the prosecutor's office. Hopefully that pairs with the judge being reasonable and giving this young man a chance to not enter the adult criminal system. Because once you're in there, a lot of folks unfortunately start believing those things that are said about them and how they're treated once they're on probation. And not having money, not being able to pay your fines and costs can itself be contemptuous behavior. And you're back in jail, now you can't work, you're missing time in school and all sorts of things. So yeah, it starts at a very young age, but especially for Black girls, that adultification, where people say, oh, they're not as innocent as, Caucasians of the same age. It's very unfortunate, but it affects healthcare, every aspect. We know about red wash. I said I wasn't going to make assumptions. But when we talk about redlining, I hope most people know what a food desert is, but there are neighborhoods where, unfortunately, it's easier to purchase a gun or drugs than to get a fresh piece of fruit. And although redlining and policies that dovetailed from that began in the 1930s, 3 out of the 4 houses, 80 years later, still today, these laws, although on paper Many of them have been, written out of our, case of our legislation, everything else. 3 out of 4 houses in those neighborhoods are still impacted today. Many of you, if you've ever driven on 496, those who live in Lansing, driving through, there was a neighborhood there where they said, these Black and brown folks, we need a highway, so we'll just move them away from here. And of course, I'm not pitting the roads or saying that anybody on this call is to blame for that, but these are the sorts of things that happen. And I mean, I could go on for quite some time on that. But yeah, it affects the way the food that people eat, the medical treatment they receive, the schools they go to. And once you're in the system, getting out is a tall order. It's not easy. So we've talked about Mr. Savitt, and another thing that I'd like to give Mr. Savitt credit for, and I don't know that we have 83 counties in Michigan. Forgive me, 83. Now, I know that it was this month, whether it was this week or last week, the sheriff, the Washtenaw County Sheriff said, look, many of you may not know that when you serve time behind bars in jail, they charge you. They charge you like you're in a hotel. You have to pay for that not tasty food. And so the sheriff said, you know what, we're going to forgive the debts that all this money that we're charging folks. And unfortunately, it's been, in addition to Securus, charging people to stay in touch with their family, charging them for their keep, making them pay for their own freight, has been a way that some counties, not all, have taken this money and they've used it for other things that have nothing to do with improving the circumstances of the people who they're getting the money from. Many people who, again, if the reason that you're in jail is because you can't post bond, you don't have that money to give in the first place. So those are just a few examples of how once you get in the system, it's very difficult to get out of.
I have a question to share. First of all, thank you very, very much for being here. Very, very proud of you. One of the things I'd like to ask you, they have the concept of defund the police means different things to many counties as there, many counties as there are out there. So it means a lot of different things. One of the things that it has grown to mean is now take some of those funds and not get rid of the police, but put them into other mental health kinds of entities and that kind of thing. What I understand is happening in Lansing is that they have a mental health professional who's with the police department, and they've been there for some time. My question to you is, has that individual, or if they have a number, have they made a difference? And what do you think about the concept of now dispersing various funds, not taking them from the police, but now injecting these other healthcare people into this whole scenario? Thank you.
And thank you for that question. That is an outstanding question. I think we're still kind of early as it relates to that person's involvement with the Lansing Police Department to see what kind of effect they've had. But in places like Denver, Colorado, where they've been doing this for quite some time, they have a mental health or social worker or someone who is not in that uniform, right? Doesn't have that firearm, doesn't have that utility belt like Batman or whatever it is. When they approach an individual who is in crisis, already the person is in a different frame of mind than somebody who comes and they've got all this equipment and everything else. So there, it has definitely made a difference. And police officers, they frankly don't receive the training. We are asking them to do a whole lot of things that they frankly don't have the training for. So in Denver, Colorado, when the police go out, there are certain phone numbers, and I can tell you from when I took appointed cases, there were individuals who, when we saw their name, I could tell, even without looking at the complaint, what the circumstances likely were. But, you know, so there was one gentleman who would go to the McDonald's in Mason, right next to the 55th District Court when it was cold. He would stay in there, right? And because he didn't take showers as frequently as some of the people who came into that restaurant, people took exception. And if he asked for money, here we go, they're calling the police. And they knew even before they arrived who it was. So, but still, he gets charged. He has to do some time in the jail. Okay, let's see what we can do. Just keep this moving along. Now, someone like that, even if he wasn't placed on an official term of probation, now thankfully, case management is something that I think has been around for quite some time, where community mental health would get involved and say, okay, if you need a roof over your head, or you need food, let's help you figure out how you can get some of this stuff. But if we have those folks involved at the front end, and that person is calm, and then let the mental health professionals work with that individual, and this situation not escalate, and hopefully it doesn't end up being, you know, on the 6 o'clock or 11 o'clock news and escalating in ways that we've seen too many times. I think it's a great program.
You know, thinking about the terminology in community policing is a really important topic, because we want to prevent crime, right? That's our ultimate goal.
Absolutely, absolutely. I think there are many communities where police are seen as an occupying force. So there are communities where they have residency requirements, where you've got to live in a particular area if you're going to work as a police officer or as a firefighter. Now, you know, in Michigan, that was the law, but no longer. And there are people who are thinking about bringing it back. But the real challenge that people face then is, okay, we may have that on the books, but how many police officers are we gonna have left? And as it relates to race, I will tell you that there were times, and this is probably not news to many of us, but there were times in America where, depending on whether you were seeking to get a benefit or have one taken away from you, just moving from one state to another would determine whether you were Black or not, right? So one drop, if you're trying to vote, oh, absolutely not. You can't vote because you have one drop of Black blood in you. Now, last summer, no, this was before the Rona hit. So 2019, I was on my deck. It was a Wednesday evening, summer, and Wednesday night I had a few friends over, and then on Friday I had a different group of friends over. My neighbor, I love her. She's great. Her name is Mary. When I do mock, anytime before I go to trial, I have, you know, people from the community, some current police officers. Mary comes along. So a panel, you know, what would a jury do with these facts? Because I know I look through different lenses than other folks do. Anyhow, on Wednesday, the groups were about the same size, but you tell me, on Wednesday, she said she didn't have anything to say. We saw her, we waved. On Wednesday, on the second group, she said, my goodness, it sounded like you were having a lot of fun there. Any idea about the composition of the second group? Any guesses? Those were most of my Black friends. So we were being loud. Now, she wasn't going to say, oh my goodness, you and your Black friends were so loud. That was her polite way of you know, indicating that clearly we were having a good time, and we expressed it differently than my other group of friends. But part of it comes from, if people either at work or in their personal dealings with folks don't interact with people from different cultures, then of course it's easy to be scared of people who don't look like you, or or have different names and so on. So a lot of it, while there's, a lot of training in the works, some of it, I think no matter how much training people go through, unless part of them is accustomed to dealing with people from different backgrounds, it's not going to go away. So while Lady Justice, she wears the blindfold, is individuals and what they do. They're the ones who lift up their blindfold and peek. So, but I know that our local prosecutor, I can tell you, I've practiced, I think, in 20 some counties to this point. And I appreciate that when I deal with prosecutors here in Ingham County, that they have discretion. I can't tell you how many other counties where they say, no, sorry, that's our policy. Don't even bother. That's it. Take it to trial or good luck. So I appreciate that we have, and it's not just because it's my home county, right? Because I live here and our main office is here, but prosecutors do have a great deal of discretion. And I'm just thrilled that Mr. Savage, Eli Savage, next door, well, not next door, but in Washtenaw County, is doing all the great things and showing that change is not a terrible thing. So hopefully more people will follow suit. But there are other counties where I tell you, I have friends who will charge 2 or 3 times as much because everybody from the police and prosecutors' offices are just impossible to deal with. Yeah.
Do you want to share any personal stories as a Black man who happens to now be a lawyer, either wearing your Black man hat or your, attorney hat as a Black man?
Boy, yeah. So.
Do you need a couch to lay down on now, or?
Right. So, okay, I'll try. I'll be very quick. I'll give examples of both. Meridian Township, Okemos, right? Okemos, Meridian Township. When I was a member of the Ingham County Bar Association's Young Lawyers section, we didn't do it last year because of the pandemic, but there was a race called the Paper Chase. It's a 5K. And the lawyers on this call, no doubt, have seen that movie from the 70s. And I think it's the most accurate depiction of the law school experience. So, that was our tip of the hat to that movie. Anyhow, I think we started that race in probably 2015 or thereabouts. And a lot of our proceeds would go to the Boys and Girls Club or some other local charity. Anyhow, we did it the same weekend every year. The Meridian Township Police Department would block off roads for us, help direct traffic, and so on. So they knew, right? We didn't just show up and say, guess what? Hey, run. We got permission. And this was, I think, the 3rd or 4th year. And this year I was assigned what was I doing? I was helping to mark the course so that people didn't get lost. Oh, turn here. And a police officer showed up. Broad daylight, by the way. And I'm wearing the t-shirt from the previous year. Broad daylight, and police officer approaches me. And this is one I knew, actually. I knew this cop because I cross-examined him, and I put the screws to him on the witness stand. So he knew me. He knew who it was. His stomach may have churned when he saw who it was when he was approaching me. But he said, hey, and he actually used my first name. I knew him. Hey, Takura, how you doing? We got a call. This is embarrassing. And I know you're marking the course, the race tomorrow. And again, this is our 3rd or 4th year of doing it. You can see what I'm doing. But somebody called the police and said, hey, there's some Black dude out there I don't know if they thought it was graffiti or whatever the case, but fortunately, he knew me. He knew what I was doing, but still, oh, by the way, there was someone else marking the course, and that person didn't have the police called on them. Any guesses? Who was darker, right? But
you can type your answers into the chat.
right. But that's one circumstance where I was, oh, so that Monday, so that was, the race was on Sunday. The next day we had our board meeting, and everybody was saying, oh my goodness, people had a great time. We had 15 people show up on the day off and sign up, and this is how much we're going to donate to the Boys and Girls Club. And so anything else anyone wants to share? And I told them about that, I guess, marking the course while Black. And our president at the time, she wanted to write letters to the chief of police, get somebody fired. She wanted to write to the, all the news channels. And I said, it's okay. Thank you for being sympathetic, but I'm just happy that I knew the dude. It didn't escalate. And I'm happy that I got to live to tell the story about it, right? I didn't sustain any injuries. I can tell you that even though I can cite the MCLs and court rules and, Terry versus Ohio and all of this, none of that means anything in the few minutes that a police officer has you within their control, because literally in those moments, they are the most powerful person on the planet. They can take your life. And we've seen that compliance does not necessarily mean that you will survive. Because as we know, you can be in your home playing video games or even asleep, and your life can be taken away. So what I do whenever a police officer pulls me over, doesn't matter if it's negative 15 degrees outside, I roll all my windows down and I don't make any sudden movements. I announce everything I'm going to do before I do it. Nobody who has ever pulled me over knows that I was a defense attorney. It doesn't matter, because I've heard some police officers say at the end of the day, I just want to make sure I get home to my family. And if all it takes is for me, as they're approaching the car, for them to know that there are no weapons in there, they don't have to worry about me doing anything to them, then if all it takes is for me to be a little bit chilly, then I'm fine with that. And I've told so many of my clients, the roadside is not the time and place. Allow me to take those facts, and if they have the body cam, we can, argue whatever motions, but don't do things on the side of the road and, try to escalate it. It shouldn't be that way. And I've gone to several middle schools, MSU and other places, and given lectures about knowing your rights, scenario-based training. I've talked to parents and everything else just to ensure that people know what their rights are. But again, there's a difference between what the law says and what happens when you're dealing with officer hopefully friendly, because they're not always so friendly. And I know that as a Black man, irrespective of whether I'm wearing this bow tie or I'm wearing a hoodie, all the case law and rules in my head sometimes mean nothing, because sometimes all people will see is the color of my skin. But yeah, I mean, it can be a very scary situation. And but nobody who has ever pulled me over knew that I was a defense attorney. No, I just want to get home at the end of the day.
And I had a question sent to me about whether you have any advice for law students considering criminal defense work. And then I want to just tack on, and how important is the need to diversify, right? To have a diverse courtroom, or whatever the legal context is. So tips for law students who might want to come into criminal law, and where does diversity play a role in the criminal justice system, in that very general way, about walking into a room and seeing a variety of people?
So very quickly, one thing I love about especially the Lansing campus, because I took all my classes at the Lansing campus except for one. I took sales in Ann Arbor. Anyhow, the wonderful thing about Cooley, once we are beyond this, pandemic, and everyone is vaccinated, and we can get back into courts. I would say go and watch attorneys do what they do. 54A District Court is right there at the corner of Capitol and Michigan, right there at the corner of Kalamazoo and anyway, within a 3-block radius, we have a district court, circuit court, and the Hall of Justice. So first of all, go and see attorneys do what they do. And you will see people breathing life into the Bill of Rights, right? You can see that. I mean, you can still log on and do it on Zoom, because most hearings, unless it involves a minor, free to the public to watch. You can watch a trial, and you can see people breathing life into the Constitution. And I say, as a criminal defense attorney, I'm right there in the Constitution, 6th Amendment. We don't have a constitutional right to a dentist, a plumber, or anyone else, but I'm in there in the Constitution. So I'm biased now. So I love my work as a criminal defense attorney. I can tell you that when I hear back, excuse me, from former clients or even current ones, their family members, when they say to me, listen, these are all the things that I've accomplished since you helped me, there is no better feeling. For all the times that I argue motions, which, I mean, there's an abundance of case law to support my position, and for whatever reason they get turned down. For each of those experiences, there's someone who reaches out and says, thank you for seeing me as a person, right? And not just the defendant. So it's very, very, very satisfying, gratifying work. I've been invited to weddings. I've been invited to graduations. Matter of fact, last summer, a gentleman who we defended in Jackson County, if he had lost, mandatory minimum of 25 years, and that's a whole nother topic, those mandatory minimums. But his mother, every time they have a gathering, birthday party, and he's there, he moved to Boston now, but she says the only reason he's here is because of what you did. So when he was the best man in his younger brother's wedding, they said, please, you need to be there. When I walked up with my significant other, they said, oh, that's the attorney. Now, it was pretty easy because I was the only Black dude, right? So I don't know if they said he'll be wearing a bow tie, because I was, or if they said he's a Black dude. But anyway, everybody there, even though I hadn't met them, they knew what I'd done, and that the reason he was there is because we held the government's feet to the fire, and the jury thankfully made what I felt was the right decision. But there's no amount of money that could replace that feeling. And just the thing, I've had people's aunts and uncles send bow ties, right? I guess I'm easy to shop for, birthdays and so on. But she sent a clip-on. She didn't know that I tie them on my own. Anyway, but the point is, she appreciated what it is that we did for the family. And to my earlier point, we represent more than just the individual who is in that caption. So I love what I do as a criminal defense attorney, and no regrets whatsoever. And I'll do it for as long as, my brain is working. And yeah. And importance of diversity. I think that importance of diversity should begin, first of all, with the gatekeepers to the criminal justice system, which is the police officers, because they will be less likely to be threatened, I think, by certain behaviors and people in certain areas. But I can tell you that when I go to a doctor, if that person looks like me, even though we've never met, that's a great feeling to have someone who you feel can relate to you. And I've had people say that explicitly to me. People have called and said, no, I want the Black dude to represent me. But I don't know if it's they think, because, well, they know that I have been profiled on occasion. And I'm not just going to be talking to them like, yeah, sure. This is something we read about, but it doesn't really happen in our community. So somebody who can not only sympathize, but empathize is very important. And I think it's impossible to overstate the importance of that. I could go on for a long time, but yeah, it's very important. It's very important. Let me get myself dressed again. Look at me undressing on camera.
Well, we're just about out of time. So before we thank you formally with our emojis or actual claps, or see me after the meeting, council. I was.
Oh, I've heard that. I've heard that.
Does anybody want to ask a final question or make a comment about our last hour together?
Already? Wow, it's been that long already?
Well, Takura, we cannot thank you enough for spending your late afternoon, early evening with us, sharing this really important day with me. Keep doing the work, keep fighting for justice for everyone. Everyone.
Absolutely. If I may make one more point.
Of course, please.
Okay, someone asked for so I'm going to www.cndefenders. I thought I saw somebody ask for the
your law firm.
Yes, okay, there it is. Thank you for recognizing that the work that we do as defense attorneys doesn't only impact the individual who we are representing, because every time I think every time I put a police officer on that witness stand, I cross-examine them, impeach them. If that makes them think twice or three times before stopping somebody over and coming up with a pretext reason for a stop, that benefits everyone who might otherwise have come into the criminal justice system. And we keep them honest. And I'm just thankful that Ingham County is one of those places where when the facts just don't support it, or the law doesn't support it, or it's not the right thing to do, that we actually have had, capital offenses dismissed when just as a result of work that we did to show the other side, capital offenses have been dismissed. So it is important work. It benefits people, even as you sit in your homes. Any police officer who is going to be more truthful and do better investigations as a result of having a close encounter of the fourth kind, right? Fourth Amendment with this guy, I think that's a fantastic thing. So thank you for recognizing that.
Yeah, and thank you for sort of demonstrating throughout the hour how important our client stories are and how it's important it is to tell every client story and that they have a story, right?
Right.
And if for again, the students that might be in the audience, we may not look like our clients, we may not have the same life experience as our clients, but they are our clients and we can learn a lot from them. It makes us better lawyers, it makes us better advocates, and it puts us in a better position to change an unjust system. So thank you again, Takura, for your time, and always great pleasure to see you and work with you. And thank you everyone for attending this afternoon, because it's always good to get together and talk about these issues and learn from each other. So everyone have a good evening.